week 5 of the fantasy football season, and his quarterback sits every matchup this week. First matchup, Thursday Night Football, Chicago Bears at the Washington Commanders. So Justin Fields finally a monster ball game. After all season, we haven't seen much out of him the first 3 weeks, but week 4, he had over 300 yards, 4 touchdowns in that game. And this week here versus middle of the pack type of Commander defense, I think on Thursday Night Football, I think Justin Fields once again could have a decent ball game in this one. Him and Cole Kmet are back on the same page. Him and DJ Moore have been on the same page this season. And this week I have him as start, especially with a few bye weeks already this week. With a Justin Herbert not playing this week and a few other players. I got him as a start now. To the Commander side of things, I actually like Sam Howell as a start this week here for fantasy owners. So Sam Howell, I know he's a gunslinger. I know he turns the football over a decent amount of times, but he keeps his team in games. He goes out there and he gets a decent amount of yards here, is Sam Howell. And he's got decent weapons, Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, and obviously Curtis Samuel. So one of the worst defenses in the league, this Commander team's versus. And I think Thursday Night Football is going to be a potential shootout, obviously. So I got Howell as a start. Now to the Jaguars at the Bills in London. Trevor Lawrence, it's been a disappointment so far for Lawrence the first 4 weeks of the season. Only one ball game with 20 or more fantasy points, and that was week 1 at the Indianapolis Colts. So right now, Trevor Lawrence, he's not hitting on big plays. Him and his wide receivers really aren't in sync besides him and Christian Kirk. And right now versus a tough, obviously, Buffalo Bill defense, even though Tre'Davious White is out for the season with the torn Achilles. I can't trust Lawrence in this ball game, and he's just sitting out of Josh Allen after that bad week 1 performance at the New York Jets. He's really taken off, and he's putting up top numbers at the quarterback position. So coming off a 5-touchdown game last week versus the Dolphins defense, I think Josh Allen once again is going to have a big ball game, and he's going to be a top quarterback this week in the top 2 or 3 in my ranking. So he's a start. Now to the New Orleans Saints at the Patriots. Pretty straightforward in this one. Both quarterbacks have struggled this season. I know Derek Carr has good weapons. Chris Olave, Michael Thomas, who's actually been healthy so far this season, Rashid Shaheed, but he's not going out there and he's not putting up points in fantasy leagues. So right now, even with a few guys out on this defense, in Matthew Judon and Gonzalez, possibly the 2 best defenders on this Patriot defense, Derek Carr is still a sit for me because, Belichick, after that embarrassing loss versus the Cowboys, he's going to get this defense back on track, I think, in this one. And in Gillette Stadium, obviously, this Patriot team plays way better than they do on the road. Now to Mac Jones. Mac Jones, he possibly might not even start this ball game for all we know. We saw Bailey Zappi coming in the third quarter and coming in for Mac Jones. So it's not 100% all Mac Jones' fault because he don't really have wide receivers that can make big plays. Juju Smith-Schuster, Bourne, and Devontae Parker's top 3 wide receivers, and those guys, there's not really a true number 1 receiver out of all those players. So right now, while he's not playing good football, is Mac Jones. He's been turning it over and taking big hits. He's an easy sit this week now to the Titans at the Indianapolis Colts. Ryan Tannehill, he's a sit for me. He just has no fantasy value anymore, Tannehill. I know 3-4 seasons ago he was a top 12, top 15 quarterback, but this season here he's not in sync with DeAndre Hopkins. Traylon Burks is banged up, missed last week's game. And this offense obviously runs on Derrick Henry. If Derrick Henry has a good game, they pretty much win, is this Titan team. And if Derrick Henry doesn't do anything, nothing is going on with this offense. So this week here, in a matchup at the Indianapolis Colts where Derrick Henry's had a monster career and monster ball games, I don't see Tannehill doing much. Once again, he's a sit. Anthony Richardson, he's a start for me. And so far, Richardson, in the games we've seen him, he's gone out there and he's made plays as Richardson with his legs, obviously. And this kid's got a cannon. He throws ropes down the seam and has a good deep ball as well. So a good receiver like a Michael Pittman, tight ends, he was getting involved. Andrew Ogletree last week as well. And Jonathan Taylor possibly coming back in this game, but I don't think it happens. But anyway, Anthony Richardson this week, I think he's a quarterback that could crack the top 10 in fantasy points. And after last week coming off 33 points is Richardson. I have him as a start. Now to the Ravens at the Pittsburgh Steelers. Pretty straightforward. Lamar Jackson, he's a start each and every week. And had a couple bad games here and there, but he's an MVP candidate, it looks like, this season. And when Lamar's going, he's going to have those monster games like last week where he had 4 total touchdowns. Not to the Steelers. If it's Trubisky who's going to come in for Pickett, who's hurt with the leg injury, or Kenny Pickett, I'm just not interested in any of these quarterbacks. We saw last week this Baltimore defense tear apart Darian Thompson-Robinson, the backup for the Cleveland Browns. So right now, the Steelers offense really isn't in sync. They went down to Houston last week. They got destroyed 30-6. And versus a Baltimore defense that has been playing good football over the last few weeks here and trying to get a bigger division lead at 3-1 on the season. I think they go into Pittsburgh and have a good ball game, and these quarterbacks don't do nothing. Now to the Panthers, at the Lions, Bryce Young, so far, we really haven't seen much out of this quarterback in the early going. I know he missed a ball game in week 3 as Young, came back last week, and there was no impact. But he really don't have a true number 1 wide receiver. I know Adam Thielen's been putting numbers up this season, but he's still not a number 1 wide receiver in my opinion. And defenses, they'll let Thielen have his way a little bit. But Bryce Young, he's not making the big plays. He's not putting up monster fantasy points. And this season, he's not an option. If he gets more weapons around him and could take the next step in the second year, he definitely could be a breakout guy next year. But this season, I don't see it in this ball game at a Lion defense that's been pretty solid over the last few weeks, led by Hutchinson, pass rushing the quarterback all day. He's a sit. Now to Jared Goff, he's a start. Jared Goff, he's got good weapons in the offense. Amon-Ra St. Brown, David Montgomery, he's been a good signing. Jahmyr Gibbs, even though we haven't seen much from him. But Sam Laporta, really a breakout tight end in his rookie season right here. So Jared Goff, with all those factors versus a weak defense and possibly Jameson Williams, a deep threat, coming back off suspension in this game. He's definitely a start for me. Now to the Texans at the Falcons. C.J. Stroud, this kid looks poised. And at times he looks like a 10-year veteran out there on the field for this Houston Texan team. I know last week his completion rate wasn't good, but he still went out there and put up fantasy points here with 25 points to C.J. Stroud. So Stroud, he's playing good with the weapons he has. Nico Collins, who's breaking out the season, tanked out a few good ball games. Dalton Schultz got involved as well last week with a touchdown. And right now going to Atlanta Falcon team indoor game once again where it's a fast turf. And I think this one could be a mini shootout between these two teams. I like C.J. Stroud pretty much for the remainder of the season as a quarterback who's going to be in the top 10 to 15 range each and every week at the quarterback position. So this week he's a start. Desmond Ridder, not much to say about him. He's a sit for me. He's a quarterback that can't move the ball. They got tons of weapons, obviously, there in Atlanta. Drake London, Kyle Pitts, Bijan out of the backfield. Matt Collins, a big red zone threat and deep ball guy, and he just can't get anything going. So right now, Desmond Ridder, in my opinion, he should be benched for Taylor Heineke. I think Heineke could get this offense going in the right direction. But this week here versus a pretty decent Houston Texan defense the last few weeks, he's a sit for me, especially after last week throwing 2 pick-sixes versus Jacksonville. Now to the Giants at the Miami Dolphins, pretty straightforward. Daniel Jones is a sit for me. This Giant offensive line, one of the worst, if not the worst in the league. Daniel Jones on Monday Night Football in Week 4. He just got destroyed, 10 sacks in that game Seattle had, and he had no time. He couldn't get the ball to anybody. And this week here, I'm not going to say this Miami defense is going to do the same damage they did like Seattle did to Daniel Jones, but you can't trust Daniel Jones with this offensive line and some poor decisions as well. Tua, he's a start each and every week. And this week, I think Tua could have a monster ball game. I'm going to rank him in the top 3 in my quarterback rankings. Tua's got great weapons. Tyreek Hill, obviously. Jalen Waddle, he's got to get going, I think. Durham Smythe, and now Devon A-Chain out of the backfield making some plays as well. So right now with a great matchup versus a weak secondary with a few rookie starters in it, I think Tua feasts in this one, and he's a must-start this week. Now to the Bengals at the Arizona Cardinals. Joe Burrow, I know it's been tough sledding for him this season with the calf injury, and his wide receiver, Jamar Chase, not happy and saying he's open every play. Now T. Higgins banged up with a rib injury. We'll see if he plays. But anyway, Joe Burrow, I think this week he's going to get a little bit healthier. It's a good matchup at the Arizona Cardinals, one of the worst secondaries in the league, and Budda Baker out in this game. So right now with a few quarterbacks on bye, and I think Joe Burrow, while everyone's counting him out, he's going to turn things around this week in a good matchup. I got him as a start, and Joshua Dobbs a borderline option. Joshua Dobbs, to be honest, he's been playing good football this season here, except week 2 he had one bad game, but besides that, Dobbs has gone out there and he's put on fantasy points. He can run the football a little bit, and he's not really turning the football over. So this week here versus a middle-of-the-pack type of Bengal defense in deeper leagues or even 2 quarterback leagues, I think Joshua Dobbs is a borderline option. Now to the Eagles at the Rams, Jalen Hurts, he's a start each and every week. Him and A.J. Brown back on the same page, where Brown last week exploded over 35 fantasy points in PPR leagues. And right now, Jalen Hurts, he's got it going with A.J. Brown. Devonta Smith, he'll have a good ball game here and there, but when he does, it's a monster game. And this week indoors, you can't beat that at Los Angeles in a potential type of shootout. So right now, I got Hurts as a start, Matthew Stafford as sit. I know the yards have been there for Matthew Stafford, but this Eagle defense, I think, could exploit this weak offensive line here for this Ram team. And it's going to be tough for Matthew Stafford to put up good fantasy points. I know Cooper Kupp possibly might return in this ball game here. And having Nakua and Cooper Kupp, that's pretty lethal at the wide receiver position. But right now, I got to take a wait-and-see approach with Stafford and versus one of the best front lines in football on defense here. I think Stafford's a sit. I still could see him get the 300 yards, but like one touchdown, where that's a mediocre to poor ball game. Now to the Chiefs. At the Vikings, Patrick Mahomes, he's a start each and every week. I know last week was a tough ball game fantasy-wise at the New York Jets, where he only had 15 fantasy points. But this week here, the weak Minnesota Viking defense, where I think Patrick Mahomes explodes, even though he still hasn't really found the number one wide receiver, even though obviously Travis Kelce's the number one option in that passing game. But this week here, the weak Viking defense, I have him as a start. Kirk Cousins, I know last week wasn't a great game for him, but this week it's going to be a shootout, possibly the highest scoring game of the week here between the Chiefs and the Vikings. It's an indoor game as well in Minnesota, which is always a plus. So Cousins is a start when you got weapons like Jefferson, T.J. Hawkinson, and Jordan Addison. You start them each and every week pretty much. Now to the Jets, at the Broncos, Zach Wilson, he's a sit for me. I know last week Wilson showed some signs, and him and Garrett Wilson got on the same page and going. But this week, even versus a mediocre to poor defense at Denver, I just can't trust Zach Wilson. You got to see way more out of him than one decent ball game, even though the Jets still lost that one, so he's a sit. And now to Russell Wilson, he's a sit for me. This Jet defense, they held Patrick Mahomes down pretty well, and we know this Jet defense is one of the better units in all pro football. Obviously, led by Sauce Gardner, Quentin Williams on the defensive line, C.J. Mosley, a linebacker. So right now, this is a good Jet defense. Russell Wilson, I know he's put up some decent fantasy points this season, but mostly a lot of garbage time. But I think this is going to be a close game between these two teams that have struggled offensively a lot this season and have some players on defense that can make plays. So both Wilsons are sits for me. Now to Sunday Night Football, Dallas Cowboys at the San Francisco 49ers. So Dak Prescott, it hasn't been a good year for him in my opinion. This defense has pretty much carried this Cowboy team for the most part. Where Prescott, he only had one game over 20 fantasy points, and that was week 2 versus the New York Jets. So this week versus a tough San Francisco defense, and where quarterbacks really haven't done anything. I think Dak Prescott, once again, is a sit. Now to the Niners side of things, Brock Purdy, even in a tough matchup, I think Purdy, just in the scheme of things here, is a top 12 quarterback pretty much each and every week for fantasy owners. I know it's a very tough matchup versus one of the best defenses in the league in the Dallas Cowboys, but all the weapons that Purdy has, Deebo Samuel, George Kittle, Brandon Ayuk, Christian McCaffrey out of the backfield. So right now, this Cowboy defense is good, no doubt about it, but Purdy has a lot of weapons. And we know the San Francisco 49er team over the last few seasons have had the Cowboys number, and especially in the playoffs, eliminating them 2 years in a row. So he's a start for me in the final game, Monday Night Football. Green Bay Packers at the Vegas Raiders. So Jordan Love, I know last week he got off to the slow start, but still finished with 19 fantasy points is Jordan Love. So he's a gamer. He's got pretty good weapons. Christian Watson came back last week, found the end zone. He should be a little bit healthier in this one with 11 days off. You got Romeo Doubs. Him and Love are on the same page, and hopefully Luke Musgrave comes back as well from concussion. So a lot of good nucleus guys over there for this Packer team. And this Vegas defense, we know they don't stop anyone. So right now I think Love is a start. And out to the Raiders, Jimmy Garoppolo or Aiden O'Connell. I just can't trust any of these guys. Jimmy Garoppolo has been a turnover machine. We know he missed Week 4's ball game versus the Chargers with a concussion, so possibly comes back in this one. But like I said, Garoppolo's not moving the football well. This Packer defense, they're getting a little bit healthy with the 11 days off in between ball game. And I can't start Garoppolo. And Aiden O'Connell, last week, I didn't think he was horrible, but he was a crash test dummy for most of that game, with Khalil Mack having 6 sacks in the ball game alone. So right now, he was holding on to the football too long. I know he made a few plays down the stretch and kept the Raiders in the game at the end, but right now he's not a quarterback I would trust in fantasy. Quarterback starts it every matchup for Week 5 of the fantasy football season.